South Dakota. He's a fourth-generation rancher. Him and his wife Garnett have established the Rock Hills Ranch near Lowry, South Dakota in 1976. Today it's operated by Lyle and his wife, also his daughter Luke and his wife and their 4 children. Lyle graduated from South Dakota State in 1977 with a Bachelor of Science in Agriculture. In addition to ranching, he has also operated an insurance and investment business on the ranch since 1985, and recently he is retired from multi-line insurance and investments and focuses on crop insurance only. Their family was honored to receive the 2014 South Dakota Aldo Leopold Conservation Award and the 2014 National Environmental Stewardship Award from the National Cattlemen's Beef Association. He is an active proponent of conservation, especially as it relates to soil health and grassland, and a proud grandfather of 7 above-average grandchildren.
And they are genetically enhanced. From my wife's side of the family, anyway. Anyway, I feel a privilege to come and visit with you this morning. Thank you for the opportunity. I'm not going to talk a lot about what, everything we do on our ranch, but rather just share with you some of the things we've learned about water development and what we do on our ranch. And I'm going to give credit to my son for pushing his dad a little bit sometimes on trying new things. As some of us get pretty stuck on how we've done it forever. I'm 63 years old, and there's a few things that I think are going to be good enough for the next 30 years, and I won't have to redo them, but my son calculates age and thinks that that's not good enough. So a lot of what we try and do is long-term in terms of longevity. Parts of our ranch probably have got fences on it that are 100 years old, and so it's kind of the 100-year plan is what we're looking at whenever we try and do anything. This title isn't actually 100% accurate. We added another mile of pipe this year and half a dozen more tanks. So I'm just going to show you a few things, and what I'd like you to do, this is really informal, so if you see something that's up on the screen that you'd like more information about, stop me and raise your hand and we'll talk about it. Well, we got it up, but it's not advancing. All right, so this is just an overview of our ranch, and I usually like to start every talk the same, give you a bird's eye view of our ranch headquarters, and what our mission is to reflect Christ in how we love people, manage the land, and care for inhabitants, both domestic and wild. So this is where Garnett and I live, and Luke and his family live about 4 miles from our ranch headquarters. Our ranch, you kind of get a little bit of idea of terrain. It's rough and rocky and not conducive to too much other than running grass and raising cattle and grass. The yellow that you see in there is sweet clover, which is a biennial plant. This, of course, is the second year of it. So we've got dams and we've got dugouts. This is our son's headquarters you see in the background. We've also got spring developments. The spring is up this draw, and here's one of the tanks that we have for it. This is another spring development. This one's a little bit more unique. There's a lot of wetland vegetation in here, so this is a springy, boggy area. Then I've got a buried underground storage tank here that it dumps into, and then from there it flows downhill into those water tanks that you see there. Unfortunately, we do live in an area, I don't know if you noticed the name of our ranch, it's called Rock Hills Ranch. And of those 15 miles of pipeline that we have, we try and trench it in if we can. And this is some that we just installed here in the last month, actually. And the biggest trencher in our part of the state couldn't trench through what we had. And what you see over here is a case backhoe, and it was too much for that, so he had to bring his excavator in. Just to give you an idea, that's probably about 200 feet between me and where I'm taking that picture in the pickup, and there's 3 piles of rocks there. So the name of our ranch is Rock Hills Ranch, and I guess we occasionally live up to it. It does make it pretty expensive. It probably costs us about $5 a foot to install 1.5 poly or PVC, and you know, with the digging and the pipes. So it's water development is not something that's cheap, but we feel very necessary to help in distribution of grazing. This is a pretty standard water setup that we have. This is probably about a 12-foot tire tank, and of course the middle is cemented out. This box in here is an insulated box. I'll show you a picture in just a minute with what the inside looks like, but probably of those 40 tanks, or actually 46 tanks that we probably have got about 30 of them that are set up like this. We use them both the summer and winter, and you can see there's wind protection there on this one. This is what it looks like inside the box. This particular box is set up for summertime use because it's not insulated, and so the water comes up a 3/4 inch poly line because we have a curb stop probably somewhere within 50 feet of the tank, so we can turn each tank off and on. And then a 3/4 inch poly line comes up to, this is a Roberts valve here, and you can see the high water mark, so the valve is below the water. This is something I built to put on top. We've got raccoons in our area, and raccoons figure out that it's warm down in the bottom of that 10-inch riser pipe, but after being down there for a short time, they figure out they can't get back up, and by the time we find them, they've chewed through the 3/4 inch poly line, which if you got a 5-inch or a 5-foot concrete pad around the outside of the water tank is a challenge, but you learn how to be a badger and dig a hole straight down and then in about 8 feet until you get to where the line is. So it's kind of a trick to replace it. So we've learned it's a lot easier to build these kind of protections on the top to keep them from crawling down in. One of the disadvantages of the Roberts valve, it doesn't have the pressure that's ability to withstand high pressures. So in some of our applications, we'll use something other than a Roberts valve. So we also put in these escape ramps for birds when they get into our water tanks. I can't tell you how well they work because I don't know how many of them get out, but occasionally there are birds that don't get out, even with the escape ramps. So this is one of the tanks we recently installed, and this is one of Luke's deals where he said, "Dad, you got to come up with something different other than the wood box," because I've noticed that those that are 30 years old are starting to rot out. And I told him, well, it's no problem, I can rebuild them, but he doesn't want to rebuild them. So he challenged me to come up with something different. So what I did was I designed this concrete box, which is 2 feet wide, 4 feet long, and then the interior of it is, this is about 1 foot wide and 34 inches long. And I frame it up with 3/4 inch plywood on the outside, and then I use 2-inch polystyrene on the inside, and I pour it by hand. It weighs about 900 pounds, so it takes 15 bags of saccrete if you do it with saccrete, or if you're pouring a pad like I was here, I just fill up the bucket on our skid steer with concrete and then shovel it in the form that I've created. And then once it's completed and set up, then we will take and lift it and set it over the top of the riser pipe you see here. We put the ties next to the tank here, and you'll see what we do with that later, but we have them coming out of the ground that far in case we want to attach a fence or something to it. This is the inside of that particular setup once we set the concrete box over the top. You can see there's an apex valve in there. We like the apex valves because we feel the flow is better with them than it is with the Roberts valve. They don't withstand the cold quite as easily from the standpoint. I think they might freeze up a little easier, and they are harder to thaw out if they do freeze up. Occasionally our valves, of course, do freeze up, and we just use hot water to thaw them out. This is an example of one of them that we have set up for wintertime watering. And if you have, it's all about livestock numbers. If you have adequate livestock numbers, then the valve opens and closes enough inside the box here that that doesn't freeze up. Plus you get the geothermal effect from the heat rising to help keep that open. And then it's just a matter of having enough cattle drinking here. If you have, I would say if you've got 100 head drinking out of a tank like this, it's very seldom does it even freeze on the surface. Down to probably, it's got to be below 0 before the surface will freeze. If you've got them in a confined situation where you're feeding them dry feed. If they're out grazing, they'll freeze up easier because cattle on our ranch that are out grazing, especially if there's snow on the ground, sometimes it can be 2 days before they come back in for water. So that can be somewhat of an issue. This gives you an idea, too, of one of the things my son has started this year. He's got a program that called Barn Owl that monitors the water tanks. So we have 2 herds in our ranch, young cows and old cows. We have them sorted by age. These are our old cows. And you can see this picture was taken on the 29th of November. It was 25 degrees Fahrenheit. It was taken at 10 o'clock in the morning. And he's got it set up to take pictures twice a day, once in the morning and then once in the afternoon. This particular day it was 4 degrees, and that was on the 26th of November. The nice thing about it is this time of year it tells us if we need to go out and chop ice. And these cattle are probably, they're about 3 miles from our headquarters, and so it's not an easy place to get to, so we won't go up there unless we have to. So it's a program that he's got cameras for, and it's pretty inexpensive. I'm going to give Alan Newport a plug here. He wrote an article in, which publications was that in, Alan?
Well, it's a beef producer, but it would have been in a bunch of the state farm publications.
Okay, beef producer and a bunch of farm publications about this idea that my son Luke came up with. It does have its downfalls. I took this picture probably a week ago, and if the camera gets frosty, it's located here, it doesn't take a picture very good at all. It gets a pretty cloudy picture. So on this particular day I did drive up, but it gives you an idea where our curb stops are. So we have 2 curb stops here. One of them, this one right here, controls the water into this tank, and there's a second one there, and you can actually see the other line. If we want to add a second line or a second tank because we need more capacity in the summer, we can set another tank right next to it. The easiest way to describe this is a 2,300-gallon chicken drinker. But the nice part about it, we have trouble with cattle, you know, and I talked to one of my friends from Nebraska because our cows will crawl in our water tanks in hot weather. And he said that's because they're used to drinking out of dams and dugouts. In their country, they don't have dams and dugouts, so they don't worry about cattle crawling in, but we do. The nice thing about this tank is they're portable, holds 2,300 gallons. If you've got sheep, small calves, cows, bulls, doesn't matter. Any of them can drink out of it. And it's also designed to be moved with a skid steer. It's a very durable tank. This is another one we've got that's a little bit smaller. It's actually, one of the reasons we bought it is you can see right here, there's something with a hole in it on each side. With our bale bed pickups, we can pick them up and move them. This one here holds 1,400 gallons. And there's one added advantage, it does provide some shade. This is what they look like when they're filling, and this is what it looks like when it's full. If for some reason this valve fails here, or the float for whatever reason creates an overflow, there are holes here, and those holes that will spill out into the troughs that surround it. And I guess eventually it would make a mess, but that's one of the advantages of the Barn Owl program that Luke's got, is twice a day we're getting a picture showing what's happening with our watering system. This is another setup that I've got. In this particular case, it's like the one that I showed you in the beginning with the tall posts. So we got 3 posts. The 12-foot water tank, uke tire, works perfectly for putting guardrail around it. And then you can see I've repurposed a shuttle cage here to protect the float, because in our country cattle do get in, and sometimes they get underneath the guardrail. And so I like to protect the float setup, and we use an apex float, and instead of have a string with a float on the top, we've got just a rod connected to the float ball itself. We do have other setups that are for just summer use only. This is a pretty typical one. This is an 8x12 fiberglass tank, again protected with guardrail. And one of the things we do for feeding a lot of our summertime use only water tanks is above ground 1-inch HDPE, 1.5 HDPE water line. And so this is set up, the way we drain it is we just have a cam lock on a banjo fitting here that we can open up and drain. But for the most part, we don't drain any of our HDPE pipe. I've been told by people that are in the know that water expands 7% and the HDPE pipe will withstand 11%. So we have very little problem with these pipes freezing. You know, the bad part about them is we get into November and sometimes even October, they will freeze and then we can't use them. But we don't drain them over the winter. For the most part, we don't drain any of them. So this is a typical setup. We've got a uke tire that we can use for the winter here. And then in the summer, we can use both of them. And so we have the second line going over to this tank here, so we have increased capacity for summertime use also. And this is what it looks like coming into the tank. We just take something heavy that we can tie that PVC pipe to, or the HDPE pipe to, and then just have the ball and float. Same view. One of the problems we've had, because we lay the pipe on the surface, is our ground that we're in is pretty hilly, and HDPE pipe will move. And so what we started to do is plow the pipe in. And so here I'm plowing it in, and sometimes we plow in the whole distance, but most of the time we like to plow in the beginning where there's heavier traffic, and that's primarily to protect the pipe and keep it from moving. And then on both ends we'll plow it in. So this is what the plow looks like. It's one that we've had designed. The pipe feeds in this end and then comes out the other. And we're only concerned about getting it covered with dirt. You know, so if we get it in the ground 6 inches, that's good enough for us. We're also blessed with having a flowing well. We've got 3 shallow wells that are 50 foot deep, and then we've got a flowing well that's about 2,000 feet deep. And we've also got 4 or 5 rural water hookups, in addition to some spring developments. So our goal in our ranch is to convert solar energy into products for human consumption profitably while making a positive impact on our ecosystem. And you notice that I highlight the word profitably. There's a lot of things we can do, but at the end of the day, we've got to figure out ways to pay for them. So if you want more information about anything that we do, you can go to our website. We are looking at being a multi-species operation this coming year. We do also have income from hunting, in addition to cattle. And so you can learn a little bit more about our ranch if you go to our website. But at this time, I'll ask if anybody has any questions about anything we do.